Economics 101 suggests that the price of an item is dictated both by the supply of that item and the demand for that item in the marketplace. I think when it comes to real estate, the media in general, the real estate industry as a whole, we seem to focus a lot on the demand side of things. What's the current income to property price ratios? What are interest rates doing? What is the demand for real estate like? What inquiries are we seeing? And I think a lot of the times we actually forget about the supply side of the equation. And the supply side of the equation is just as important when we're predicting prices both of rentals and sales properties as is the demand side. So today I want to take a deep dive into the supply side and what we see on the supply side of the equation. First and foremost, I want to talk about a couple of things that really do impact the supply side of the equation. And the first thing is a very topical thing that we're seeing at the moment, and that is inflation. Inflation at the moment is through the roof. The cost of labour, the cost of timber, the cost of concrete has all gone up significantly. And of course, this has meant building a new home has become substantially more expensive than it was just a year ago. So what does this do to the supply side? Obviously, if a new house is costing substantially more than an established dwelling, people are going to be more likely to buy that established dwelling than build new. And where this is really critical in what we're seeing at the moment is when it comes to the affordable properties, your small units, your small houses, essentially the cost to build new is too substantial compared to this. If you look at the unit market here in Cairns, you can still buy a unit between 190 up to 300,000. Whereas a developer to come in and build those new units today, a minimum you're going to be looking at between sort of 4 to 450 to build something quite basic. So the supply side of that equation is being really limited, and that's what we're seeing push through to the rental prices in this market. And it's why I think unit prices will continue to do exceedingly well into the future, is just because they're so far below replacement cost. The second big thing impacting supply at the moment is the restrictions put on by the council, the government taxes, the infrastructure taxes around building new properties. It really does hinder the supply, and it's what we have seen over the last decade, if not longer. The more and more restrictions that come into place, the more expensive it is to build new, and hence we're not seeing that supply of new properties coming to market. The third thing I wanted to talk about when it comes to supply is essentially the changeover costs. If you're a mum and dad and you've had 2, 3, 4 kids and those kids have flown the nest and headed off on their next adventure, you might be living in a 5 or a 6 bedroom home that's way bigger than you actually need. But the reality is the effort and the changeover cost to move from that property to another is prohibitive. So people are less likely to sell, and this is where what's just happened in New South Wales with the change in stamp duty laws is going to help free up and make property a little bit more liquid down there, as the cost to change properties has become less in that state. Queensland's still got the old stamp duty where you pay on purchase, and it does make swapping homes quite an expensive process, and that limits the supply of that property coming to market, and in turn makes the market less liquid. So we know that supply is extremely tight at the moment. It is hard to get out there and buy a property, but just how hard is it? Now, I keep a track of, keep an eye on the data for the Cairns region, as this is my local market. It's where I've invested quite heavily, and it's where I help people buy and sell property. So, looking back in the data and having a look back to October 2018, I actually took a screenshot and sent it to a friend of mine at that time. There was 470 open homes. So, October 2018, 470 open homes for that Saturday. So if you were a buyer going out there to look at a property, there might have been 20 homes that ticked your boxes that you might have been going to see that weekend. Fast forward to today, and I'm filming this in June of 2022, and how many open homes do you think there were? Do you think there was more open homes on the back of rising interest rates, more open homes on the back of a little bit of uncertainty around the economy at the moment, or do you think there was less? The weekend just gone, there was only 156 open homes. So that's a decline of 67%. So if you were that buyer in 2018 going out to look at 20 properties that ticked your boxes, this weekend there might only been 6 that suited your needs. Or if you're looking for something even more specific, you might have gone from having a choice of 10 down to a choice of 3. Now, you don't need to be a rocket scientist here to realise what that does in the supply and demand equation, and you can see why prices are quickly going up in this area, just because the amount of supply is in such short supply. Moving forward, the other thing I wanted to look at today was each year the government comes out with its State of the Nation housing report, and this report looks at both migration, population growth, and housing supply and affordability across Australia. Now, one of the disappointing things about this report, and a disappointing thing about a lot of reporting when it comes to property, is it's heavily focused on the capital cities, and I don't think enough information and enough support is given to regional areas. And this report's no different, but looking at the information on hand and looking at the information available, it starts to paint a really interesting picture moving into the future. Firstly, this report predicts that between 2002, where we currently are, and 2024, there's actually going to be a housing oversupply. And I think a lot of this is on the back of a lot of the building grants that were given out during the last couple of years. A lot of this was Sydney and Melbourne. A lot of units did get built in those markets over the last couple of years. And altogether, when you look at Australia as a whole, they do predict that we are in a housing oversupply for the next 2 years. What gets really interesting is when you start looking at the migration data. The migration and immigration data. Immigration essentially dropped off the cliff during the last couple of years, and they're predicting it to return back to normal levels by 2024. And that's a net gain of 235,000 people moving to Australia by 2024. And that trend continuing with about that same number of people moving into the country over the next 10 years. So that's a substantial amount of immigration coming into the country. And obviously, as more people move in, we need to create more housing for them. So this is where the report goes to say that basically from 2005 to it predicts out to 2032, there will be a substantial housing shortage across Australia. And they've got this peaking at a shortage of 51,000 properties. So that's an amazing little data set. And obviously, looking at the supply side of the supply and demand equation, it's going to have a lot of upward pressure on house prices when there's a shortage of 51,000 properties per year during that period of 2025 through to 2032. So overall, what do we do with this information? What do we know? Well, firstly, it shows that property is going to remain very strong. I don't think it's going to matter what interest rates do too much in the affordable market. So that's a markets where I see sort of under 800,000. Those markets I think are going to continue to be extremely strong even on the back of rising interest rates. I also think if you are looking and deciding whether you should continue to rent or buy something, I think there's a lot of benefits to buying in this market where there is going to be a continued housing shortage, and this is really going to continue to a massive shortage of rentals moving into the coming years. If you haven't seen my video on the Cairns rental market that I did recently, it's well worth a watch. Some really interesting stats in that, both around supply and demand moving into the future. But overall, I think the property market is going to be very strong, especially as that immigration really starts to pick up in 2024. And I think putting yourself in a position to make the most of that is going to be very beneficial leading into the future. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, make sure you give me a like, make sure you subscribe. We put a heap of content out on this channel and love bringing you new videos. Have a fantastic day, and I'll talk to you soon.